Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to say a special thanks to Gonzalo for his excellent organization. It's a delight to be here and find this discussion very interesting and also relevant in terms of our own work at OECD. Just a quick introduction. I'm based at OECD in Paris, and I work in our Environment Directorate, and one of the main topics that we're working on in the moment at the request of member states is really this question of water financing. For many, many years, and really for decades, we've been saying there's not enough money going into the water sector, and we're clearly not reaching our goals. Of course, moving from the MDGs to the Sustainable Development Goals means we just raise the level of ambition. And of course, moving from the MDGs to the SDGs, we're not only looking at developing countries, but really this issue is relevant for all countries, including advanced economies like OECD member countries. And in fact, Manuel, in the introduction, hinted at the fact that even in countries like Spain, where you have a very developed economy, you still have significant funding and financing challenges. That said, I want to take a more optimistic tone, actually, in my presentation, and we'll hopefully connect with some of the themes that Arthur and Frederick introduced as well. Let me just say by starting out that, in our work, we have spent quite some years trying to build up what we consider the economic case for investment. And this is really looking at the range of benefits that can be achieved from investment in water-related infrastructures. This can be in terms of improving GDP or avoiding losses in GDP. Here we have some numbers that give you headline figures on how these can be quantified, but also it relates, of course, to outcomes in terms of impact on people's health, their productivity, and even their lifespan. So we'd say this economic case is actually quite strong, but the problem is that a lot of those benefits that arise from those investments aren't actually captured in the financial return. And this is the point that Arthur was making related to externalities. Of course, many of these benefits are external to the actual investment proposition. And that's why we say that the economic case for investment in water does not always translate into a strong financial case. So when you go then to the financiers and then asking for capital put into the sector, they want to have an adequate risk-adjusted return, and for the moment, that can only be found in certain parts of the water sector. But that said, I want to touch on three trends that I think provide some optimism to think that we might be in a situation where we're going to really have an opportunity to scale up financing that's flowing into the sector. And to talk about the first one, the first point I'm going to talk about is blended finance. And really, to start that discussion, I want to highlight this trend related to official development assistance is going into water and sanitation. And this is basically the money that governments are spending in terms of their bilateral and multilateral development cooperation. And frankly, what we see is this is stagnant. And if you look at the contrast with the trends in terms of money that's going into energy, we see that energy is capturing a greater share of this money and water is capturing a declining share. Well, this means also that, of course, that official development system, that donor money that's going into the sector is far from sufficient to achieving our goals. Also then, if we look at how much of that money, that donor money, is being used to crowd in more commercial finance, so risk capital, we see that water, compared to other sectors, only is capturing a very small share of that. In fact, less than 2% comes from the water sector. You see banking and financial services manage to crowd in more commercial finance, energy, industry, etc. And we can, of course, ask the question of why. In many cases, this is because there's a much stronger business case for investment here, and financiers can see some kind of return at the end of the tunnel. That said, we are also spending quite some time looking at the ways in which we can scale up models of blended finance that go into the water sector. And here there is some reason for optimism. When we talk about blended finance at OECD, what we're really talking about is blending development finance that comes from either public or private sources. So that can be donor money, but it can also be philanthropies. There's a lot of foundation putting a lot of money into the water sector. And using that money in a more strategic way, so you're not trying to fund all of the projects, but in fact you're trying to de-risk the projects. That can be done through guarantees and other tools, but ways in which that can create a more attractive investment proposition for commercial capital. And here we have seen some very interesting examples. We had a very interesting workshop in Germany not too long ago where we see some areas of promise where this is emerging in the water sector. The second point I wanted to move to in terms of looking for trends where we can have some reasons for optimism, and that's related to trends in water-related innovation. Now, innovation came up a few times in Arthur and Frederick's talks, and here what this data focuses on is really patent data that's related to specific water-related technologies. Now, a lot of innovation that's outside of the water sector is going to be very relevant for scaling up financing, and this is what the infrastructure of finance that Arthur is talking about. But here, what we've done is looked at actually water-specific investments or water-specific technologies. So these are demand-side, supply-side, and pollution abatement technologies. And here we see that these trends show that this has more than doubled since 1990, which is an encouraging trend. And you can see even supply-side technologies have taken a big spike. But why is this interesting? Well, here, this shows that, of course, the demand for these types of technologies is also there in the marketplace, and that is a reflection also of the increasing pressures on the resource. This is just an interesting slide to show you some of the top water-related inventor countries. This is basically asking the question of where those innovations are happening. And here, the size of the circle is it reflects the size of the GDP. This is not about an America first approach, but the United States is, of course, a big economy, so it's responsible for quite a lot of share of the overall innovation. And then as you move up the chart, you see that you have increasing specialization. So you see some countries that the share of their overall innovation is really focused on water. So what this means is those technologies are also coming to market, and there's several implications there. When those technologies are combined with other types of technologies, like smart sensors, like big data, like real-time analytics, then you have some real potential for changing the cost structure of investments, and that can be very encouraging as well. The third trend I wanted to highlight is that can provide us some reasons for optimism is this rapid development of the green bond market. There's a lot of interest and excitement around this. There's also some criticism too. I tend to take it in a more of a positive view. And what we see here is some specific analysis that looks at the share of this growing green bond market that can be allocated to water-related investments. So green bonds are basically use of proceeds bonds, so they're debt financed, but the issuer is saying, we're going to use this money for specific purposes. And what's encouraging here is that the demand for those bonds is outstripping the supply. And that means that there's a real appetite for investors to have their money flowing into things that they are considering green or sustainable. So here is the share that is eligible for water. It doesn't mean all that money will go to water, but it could be used for water. And that accounts for about $170 billion in terms of the cumulative issuance since 2008. So I think that's a reason for optimism. I'm going to wrap up here and just leave you with a last word regarding what we're doing and trying to help move this discussion forward at OECD. One thing that we noticed in our work is that for many, many years, the OECD, or the water community, I would say, has been claiming that we need more financing, we need more funding for this sector. And we agree with that based on this economic case. At the same time, the water community has been largely talking amongst itself, and we don't think that's going to be sufficient to really move the conversation forward, which is why we established this platform at the beginning of last year, with two partners, the World Water Council and the Government of the Netherlands. And this is really our effort to create a bridge between the water community and the financing community. And here we're interested in talking to the whole range of the financing community, from the donors, the bilaterals, the multilaterals, to impact investors, to philanthropies and foundations, to institutional investors, the ones that are really controlling big piles of capital, and also commercial banks. There's this whole range of different financial actors that really can bring their knowledge, their efforts, and their vehicles to play in this space. So that's what we're doing with the roundtable, and if you're interested in that, please do talk to me. We had our third meeting on Monday in Paris and had about 100 people around the table, a very diverse group and very dynamic discussions. So I'm going to leave it there and look forward to the discussion.
Gracias.